You can't grow plants in the shade? Of course you can. You can't find plants that grow in the shade? Oh, yes, you can. There are so many plants that we use in our urban and suburban shade gardens for clients. We're going to go through lots of those today, as well as principles about how to create a sustainable, natural landscape using native plants to help wildlife, help the environment, and just have a gorgeous space for humans and all species together. So let's get going, shall we? I am Benjamin Vogt. I am a designer and educator, owner of Prairie Up LLC. My books are A New Garden Ethic, Cultivating Defiant Compassion for an Uncertain Future, as well as the best-selling and now in its seventh printing, Prairie Up, An Introduction to Natural Garden Design. My design work has appeared in Better Homes and Gardens, Dwell, Fine Gardening, Horticulture, Midwest Living, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Guardian, lots of different publications and podcasts, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. So we are going to say goodbye to tired, overused, under wildlife supporting plant species like Astobe brunera, definitely hosta, Pulmonaria, Heuchera, hellebores, Convallaria, Galanthus. There are so many more species that we can use in the shade to create a vibrant, aesthetically pleasing wildlife habitat that is going to cover up all that bare soil and work in landscapes where lawn just doesn't, which is good. We don't want much lawn anyway. We want to reduce our lawn wherever we can. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Saying goodbye to wood mulch and bare soil. We can do so much more in shade. Under oak trees, under pine trees, under maple trees, under black walnuts. Everything here is going to work today. So the benefits of shade gardens are actually many. I would say I almost prefer to install and design shade gardens. There's almost always less weed pressure because there's less sunlight. So weed seeds need sunlight to germinate in most cases, and in shade there's just less of that. The temperatures in shade are moderated, so that's beneficial for plants, especially keeping soil moisture up, as drought conditions always seem to be getting worse here with climate change. And more moderate temperatures in the shade is great for gardeners. Really reduces the physical stress. Shade plants also tend to be shorter than their sun cousins, which helps the gardener design a less quote unquote weedy space that's not as quote unquote messy looking to neighbors. That's always the number one complaint for weed control, the number one thing city inspectors are looking for. But really, that's a minor issue, and it hardly ever happens. Out of 100 plus client gardens we've done, we've only ever had neighbor complaints on 3. So very good percentages in your favor. So you might have a shade garden that looks something like this. There are a lot of gaps that need to be filled in, a lot more structure, a lot more flowers we can have. So plenty of holes to put plants into. You can never have enough plants. Your landscape may look something like this. Long grass, most typical long grass species just cannot do well underneath a tree. And that's, okay. We have, you go into any woodland or forest ecosystem, and my goodness, there's lots of plants on the ground. So why aren't we using those plants here? Stop trying to throw down grass seed and be like, geez, the grass isn't growing. Why not? I don't get it. There are options. We're looking at them today. Here we have a landscape where, the homeowner's just like nothing's going to grow, but by golly, I'm going to have some sort of garden bed look, and we have mulch. Unfortunately, wood mulch is not a garden design element, and it certainly is not a garden, but we have ample plants that will thrive in this sort of space. You may have soil that is washed away and eroded because there are no plants keeping the soil in place. So we have tree roots being exposed. Well, we can plant into this as well. Let plants self-sow and fill in some of those smaller gaps even more where potted plant material just won't be able to fit for us. Here's a landscape here. Client was not thrilled with the appearance of it and was definitely tired of the hosta. They just don't provide hardly any wildlife support at all. Came in. Actually, a client helped us get rid of most of these plants to prep the space. Came in and put down a 1 or 2 inch initial mulch layer. Won't ever have to mulch again because the plants are going to do that for us, because we're planting densely in layers 12 inches apart, emulating what a natural woodland floor understory would look like. And here's what it looked like about a year and a half later or so. So what we are practicing here is something called matrix design. This is planting 12 inches apart or less. So the matrix is composed of in a shade garden at least, of different sedge species or even just one sedge species. And that's all these green circles on here. So this is a 12 by 12 inch or 1 foot by 1 foot grid here, and we're placing a sedge species every 12 inches. There are sedge for full sun, sedge for deep shade, sedge for dappled shade, east side sun, sedge for dry conditions, sedge for moist conditions. And a lot of sedge species are very adaptable. Some of the most adaptable, I think personally, are Carex albicans, Carex bengalii. We're going to look at a lot of these species here in a couple of minutes. So this is the matrix. This best emulates how plants assemble themselves out in nature, out in the wild, in the forest. And then we come in amongst all those green circles and we place our masses and drifts of different flower species that have succession of bloom throughout the entire growing season, so spring through fall. And you don't have to design a 400 square foot garden. You can just design a 100 square foot garden, then repeat that matrix design plan, that modular 100 square feet. Just repeat it over and over, maybe rotate it 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and cover as much of as much as you want to. It could be 1,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet, and your module is maybe 200 or 300 square feet. So you only have to design a small garden in order to create a large one. So we are replacing just 1 to 2 inches of wood mulch at installation. Wood mulch is going to break down slower in sunlight anyway, and it's there just to stabilize the soil, increase soil moisture right at the beginning, outcompete some weed seeds that might be brought up to the surface while we're planting. That's what happens when you disturb the soil. But it is not something you want to put there after year after year, spring after spring, because mulch just keeps plants in a perpetual state of establishment. The ideal plants that we're putting in the ground can't self-sow and spread and fully express themselves, so mulch is just needed at the time of install. And then we let the matrix, the living green mulch, as we would see out in the wild in a sunny meadow or a shady meadow, we're letting the plants do the work for us. We're matching them to the site, we're matching them to one another based on their levels of sociability and reproduction. We'll get to that in a few minutes as well. Here's a garden, a large one, about 3,500 square feet. Just after planting, you can see sedge species placed about 12 to 15 inches apart, and then different forb species planted amongst them. Not terribly sexy at the beginning, but it will be in a few years. We are using young plants, often referred to as plugs or liners. You can see there are two different kinds here, some that come in little plastic pots that are 2.5 inches wide, and then some that come just not in a container. So those longer plugs there, you can see are the sedge there. This is the difference in price. A 2.5-inch pot, $3 to $5. A 1-gallon pot at a big box nursery or something, $15 to $25. Or a 50 plug tray. That's where the roots are exposed when you pull them out. $120, $140 depending on species. These are retail prices. You can find plugs most readily at an online exchange called Izel Native Plants, IZEL. They work with native plant regional wholesalers across the central and eastern United States. Wholesalers that used to just work with landscapers and garden designers, but now through Izel work with everyday gardeners, which is fantastic. Way more bang for your buck when you're using plugs and a lot easier to dig in clay soil. This is what it looks like. A lot of these gardens look like after about 2 years of growth. So I have Carex albicans here, and that left picture in the foreground with some geranium, maculatum, wild geranium amongst it. And then behind that, the taller sedge is Carex bengalii. Another image here. The matrix is dominated, that living green mulch is dominated by Carex albicans and Carex pennsylvanica. We got a bunch of different perennials and ephemeral species in here, like May apple here in the front is an ephemeral. So done doing its thing by early to midsummer. And then just a lot of different flower species in there. So this is under a maple tree, if I do recall. Management of shade gardens especially tends to be a lot less stressful than sun gardens, least of which again is because there tends to be a little bit less weed pressure. Usually I say maybe you just cut down the perennial forb flower stalks in spring when soil temperatures are 50 degrees or when other people start mowing, but you're not going to be mowing because you replaced your lawn with a wonderful natural shade meadow. I do mostly encourage shade gardens to just do their own thing. Sedge really don't ever need to be cut back. They're shorter plants, lower plants, and their foliage just naturally mats down on the ground and creates a natural mulch for you. Here's a quick management graph. I'll let you pause the screen here if you want to so you can go over it. Just basically, very basic suggestion about what you might want to be looking at in the first couple of years. Your management guide will vary by specific site conditions that you have as well as region, but this is a decent baseline, I think. Sedge tend to act as bodyguard plants when flowers are young. So, like in this garden right here, we had wild phlox with which the bunnies just, they just thought it was like opening a bag of M&Ms. It was fantastic for them. But after a year, the sedge matured, grew up, and rabbits don't really like to eat sedge. For some reason, it's not nearly as palatable. So, they just for some reason also the bunnies just don't seem to work their way through that sedge and have as easy access to flowers. So and once the flowers get mature and have a nice robust root system, then the plants tend to stay intact a lot longer. But again, in a natural garden, we want to see our plants eaten, right? We want to see holes in the leaves, which tell us that moth and butterfly, other bug and insect caterpillars are eating the plants, using them, or creating a healthy ecosystem. So it's never damage. It's actually evidence that you have a resilient landscape. And when we live in areas that are lawn dominated, there's just really not much else for any type of wildlife to eat. So of course, when you put a buffet out there, they're going to be like, oh, finally, awesome, I got food to eat. This is fantastic. So we need to find ways to celebrate that and not be helicopter gardening so much. Design 101, this is just really quick. If you want to go a lot deeper, I got my book Prairie Up, 20 online classes, about 50 to 60 minutes each that you can go and really delve into principles of design and management and plant selection and plant research and just, get the nitty gritty. But really quick, basically, we want to plant flowers in drifts and masses. So 3 or 5, of a kind here, 3 or 5 of a kind there. This shows repeating intention to anybody walking by the landscape because in the wild, we're always looking to find repetition to connect the dots. And we can do that here in a natural garden as well by repeating masses of flowers. Keeping plants lower, more uniform, average height of around 2 feet is what we do, and we are converting shade lawns and sun lawns in urban and suburban areas. If you do have taller plants, keep them in the middle and back of beds like you would see in traditional garden design. Researching plants does not have to be a chore and is a good thing to research plants. We have regional flora books for the southeast, northeast, midwest, southwest, northwest. I mean, there's so many out there. We have tons of regional university extensions with awesome knowledge, regional seed suppliers and nurseries, mom and pop, all the way up to the bigger ones. USD Plants database is going to provide lots of information, especially with PDF documents that come with some of the plants that are profiled. Bone app gives us a map of plant species ranges. There's bee plant, Mobot down there, Illinois wildflowers, which also shows what insect and bug species are using what plants as host plants to raise their young. Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center and Prairie Moon Nursery. When you research all these things, you get a good baseline of plant performance and expectations, even if the sources are not in your state or ecoregion. We cannot go by plant tags. There is not enough information on plant tags, especially what I think is the most important metric. And again, I have a really in-depth, detailed online class about this, but you're just getting 1 or 2 slides here today. But something called sociability ranking. I'd much rather see this ranking system on a plant tag than USD hardiness zone, which really doesn't apply to native plants and only gives us one small insight into plant performance, which is cold hardiness. We need to know how the plant's actually going to behave, how it's going to act, how it's going to perform, how is it going to spread and reproduce? Because, sometimes we're choosing plants that just put out way too much seed and it's in too small of a garden and we think, we have a black thumb, a brown thumb, we don't know what we're doing. That plant's weedy and messy and took over. Well, we selected the wrong plant for the wrong place because it has evolved to put out a lot of seed, to put out a lot of root runners. So sociability index, that would be great to see. You don't find it anywhere. You just have to create a baseline by doing research across several reliable internet and book sources. So level 1 is a clumper. It's not going to move around much. Level 2 is a light spreader. You might get some happy surprises here and there or small colonies. 3 will be much larger colonies. They're going to be much more scattered across the landscape. And level 4 is a plant that is almost, if not entirely, taking over a landscape. So here's some examples of level 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, not necessarily all for a shade garden, but you can research these and get a basic idea of what I'm talking about here with sociability. So if you have a birch tree, and too many of us do, especially river birches, which are not meant to be specimen trees out in an open lawn, they just hate that. They like their roots shaded. Most trees have evolved to grow in a plant community, but instead we treat them, as just trees, sculptures that you put out in the middle of a lawn, and it's hot and sunny and dry and nasty and gnarly, and they don't have the benefit of other plants helping to build the soil and conserve soil moisture with them. So birch trees especially love to have their ground covered with woodland sedge and flowers. Example right here. This is creating a healthier ecosystem in so many ways and reducing management time and resource use when you don't have to have a lawn. And again, what works under oaks, pines, and black walnuts? Everything we're talking about here today, every single plant we're looking at. Like this landscape here, this is under a black walnut. We've got Carex springallii, Carex albicans, Geranium maculatum, wild violet, Pachyra aurea, Solidago flexicalis, Ecology canadensis. There's just so many different species in here, and they're just all like, cool, awesome, let's do it. And the black walnut's like, cool, awesome, let's do it. Now, many keystone plants are which support a large diversity of insect larvae, so butterfly young, moth young, include trees such as oak, elm, cherries, and willows. A natural garden ground layer is going to provide places for those caterpillars, those larvae, to drop from the tree, complete their life cycle, or pupate, spend those 2 weeks or so in a cocoon or chrysalis. And a lawn does not do this. There's no soft landing. It's actually a hard landing. There's nowhere to shelter. Soft landings also provide host plants for even more larvae and caterpillars, as well as pollen and nectar for adult bees, moths, butterflies, wasps, and all the good stuff that literally make this world run and work. Here's a soft landing underneath a small white birch tree. See some Carex blanda in there, obviously wild columbine, wild geranium, some early meadow rue. Now, somebody's already thinking, well, what about ticks? Well, they're all but unavoidable now, especially with increased climate change, which is making winters a lot less colder and increasing ranges as temperatures warm. And with deer ticks, we have an issue of eroded trophic cascade. That means that white-footed mice, which are a vector for Lyme disease, the lack of habitat for predators increases those mice populations. So as habitats decrease, we build homes in those habitats. We build roads and malls and just take that habitat away. We're losing our foxes. We're losing our coyotes, our wolves, and even our owls. And deer love suburbia, right? After Long Island, New York in the 1940s and 50s was converted from meadow to suburb, deer just rebounded. They were practically extirpated from Long Island, but then suburbs came in and gave them exactly what they needed to thrive: bare open spaces of lawn. So let's look at sedge matrix examples. I'm going to go through a lot of plants. I'm trying to keep this presentation manageably short, so anything you want to look at, just pause the screen. Carex pennsylvanica makes a nice ground cover sedge that we let sort of roam among clump forming sedge. So this is more like a level 2, sometimes even a level 3, depending on the site conditions on the sociability ranking index, and Carex albicans would be 1. So I love to mix sedge in a lot of places, different species. There's Carex albicans, one of my main, probably number one go-to sedge for part sun, full shade, full sun underneath the shade of taller perennials and warm season bunch grasses. But this is a clumping type species. There's curly sedge and eastern star sedge, which in form look a lot like Carex albicans. Carex bengale is a taller sedge with a little bit thicker leaves. Does well from dry to moist conditions. So the more sun it gets, the more moisture it should have. So that makes it an adaptable species in my mind. Carex blanda is a very short, leathery, thicker type foliage species. Does put out a lot of seeds, so tons of happy surprises everywhere. So great at site stabilization, reducing erosion on slopes, that sort of thing. There's lots of flower species. I can only show you a few of them work in shade conditions, including those that work in urban and suburban conditions, because most of us live in suburbia now, don't we? Solomon seal, Polygonatum biflorum, going to spread by rhizomes. It'd be one of the more taller species you probably have in shade gardens. Queen bumblebees flock to this thing as they're establishing their nests anew every spring. Metellidophylla probably prefers more consistent soil moisture, at least medium and loamy soils, though I do have it doing well in some clay right now. A very short plant and really needs to be massed together to get full effect because those flowers are really, really tiny, but just lovely in masses. Wild columbine, everybody knows it works in sun, works from shade. Hummingbirds flock to it. Wild geranium's ground cover puts out a lot of seed. This is another push for density and layers. In really lush landscapes, geranium maculatum just does not self-sow as prolifically as it does in a more quote-unquote traditional garden bed dominated by wood mulch, where there are open gaps for seeds to come in and fill in. And that's what nature does. It abhors a vacuum. So this is maybe a level 2, level 3 plant in a traditional mulch garden, but maybe more like a level 1 plant when you have thick layers. Early meadow rue. This is the female version. There's also a male, but the foliage here is the real star of the show. Not so much the flower show. Foliage contrasts nicely with the thinner leaves of the grass-like looking sedge species in a shade meadow. White woodland aster. We have many shade tolerant asters. Thinking heartleaf aster. Oh my gosh, there really are a lot, but I can only think of 2 right now. That's terrible. I'm fired. I have several goldenrod species. One of them is Solidago flexicala, zigzag goldenrod. Goldenrod does not cause hay fever. That would be ragweed. Goldenrod pollen is very heavy and sticky. It is not wind pollinated, it's insect pollinated. This one has a very wonderful perfume to it, incredibly aromatic. Oh, there's another aster for shade. I knew I had one on here. Calico aster. Kind of open, airy, cloudy, short shrub-like aster species. Once the nectar and pollen are used up, the center of the flowers turn from yellow to pink to tell insects to, well, not bother. I'm empty. I'm out. I'm sold out. Heuchera richardsonia prairie. There's lots of heucheras out there. Don't buy those icky, nasty cultivars with plum-colored leaves. They're just not, especially those plum-colored ones. Nothing can eat them. Which I guess if that's what you want, great, but it's not going to be helping caterpillars. This one, native to the central United States, works in woodland edge settings especially. You know, there are lots of forbs that do that well too. Think east side of a house. Purple coneflower would be a good example of a woodland edge species. Anemone virginiana, tall thimbleweed would be another. I have a couple of mints, and these are not like European mints, so they're not going to just totally take over. Again, European mints, native to Europe, different ecosystem, different environment, different plant community. Soblephilia hirsuta, blooming in the middle of summer. It's a little bit harder to get a great flower show in shade gardens in the summer. There's just less options, so we really rely a lot on textural contrast in the foliage of shade gardens, but we do have a few plants that bloom in the summer. Pacaria, back to spring. There's also Pacra obovata. I think there's a couple of others. This one's probably a level 3 on the sociability scale, so putting out a lot of seed, especially after several years. Likes to create small colonies, so suited better to larger gardens and even areas where you're trying to fight against invasive weed species. So yes, again, that's what I just said. Not as many flowers in the summer, but I think shade gardens really stand out and really do the heavy lifting when you have a lot of structural contrast, a lot of foliage contrast. Um, Here's just a 2 foot deep bed. Very simple here. Outside of an elementary school, next to some vegetable garden beds. So we're bringing in beneficial pollinators to increase vegetable yields, just with some Carex albicans, some wild columbine, some wild geranium. I think there's even one zigzag goldenrod in there somewhere. Just trying to inspire you a little bit here. So these are plant species with high sociability indexes or rankings. I would not use them in small gardens, probably under a couple hundred square feet. Actually, here's Pacra obovata there on the right in Arkansas, and yeah, that's what it does. So you don't want to, if that's what you want it to do in your landscape, there you go. There's your plant. If that's not what you want it to do, if you have just, a 7,500 square foot urban lot, this is probably not the plant for you. Again, you can pause any of these slides as you need to. I can't possibly, I'd be here for an hour and a half talking about each one of these plants, and that would be awesome and sexy and thrilling, but, trying to keep it manageable today. So here's some perennial and ephemeral species for shade, to part shade, dappled sunlight conditions. Um, you'll have to research some of these. Most of these are fine with dry, medium soils, clay loam soils. Some will be a little bit more persnickety, but not really. They're pretty easy going, this list, which is why I made this specific list. Part sun perennials, grasses, and sedges. So we're thinking dappled sunlight, maybe on the drip edge of a tree, in front of a hedgerow, on the east side of a house. These would be species to look to. Understory and edge woodies. It's really hard. It's a lot harder to find woody plants for shade canopy. Woody plants, these shorter species are going to be more like early succession before trees get really tall, or they're going to be on the edge of forests or woodlands. Here's a frontline landscape. Front yard landscape was 100% lawn. Now is part shade front yard meadow garden. So shady up until about lunchtime. Then we transition to some dappled shade, and the garden space over closer to the driveway gets full sun mid-afternoon into the early evening. So big mix of sunlight, but it works. Remember, folks, I always stand in solidarity with you. We are in this together. We are rethinking pretty. We are unlawning America. We are reprairing suburbia. We are bringing habitat back. We are cleaning the air. We're cleaning water. We're rebuilding soils, providing habitat. We're doing so many wonderful, important things, and just really building this revolution of compassion and empathy for one another, building healthy, resilient communities wherever we live, work, and play. I hope you'll pick up my books. A New Garden Ethic is a very philosophical, deep why we are doing this work, and Prairie Up is the very practical how-to of why we're doing this wonderful work. And it's not really work. I find it to be a great joy whenever I kill a lawn, so hopefully you do too. Or kill a mulch bed, right? Mulch is not a design element. Again, lots of wonderful. We have 20 online classes at the website. Hopefully, going to be adding more, every year. Lots of online. We have lots of pocket guides and booklets. A lot of free articles, free guides, starter guides, all that good stuff, and a newsletter, of course. Thank you for joining us. And your shade garden is going to rock the world. So get out there and get more plants.